adventure, intrigue, lost cities, ancient mysteries, and more on this week's episode of East10 Investigates. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the East10 Outpost. I'm Cody, and I'm going to be your guide into this week's continued cosmic journey through our ancient past. Last week, we took a look at the Enuma Elis, and it introduced us to the Anunnaki Council of 12, as well as the Agigi. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I would encourage you to check out last week's video, and then pop back over here. However, if you're all caught up, let's go. This week, we're going to be taking a look at two later Sumerian texts. The Enuma Elis is Babylonian and dates back to about 4,000 years ago. Today, we're going to be looking at the Atrahasis, as well as the Epic of Gilgamesh, both of which date back to roughly 3,800 years ago, or the 18th century BC. For further context, Atrahasis is a king featured on the Sumerian kings list. Notably, he's listed as the last king before the Great Flood. So with that in mind, let's dive right into the Atrahasis and take a look at what it has to say about the enigmatic Anunnaki. The Atrahasis is one part creation story, one part flood myth. And if you're familiar with the book of Genesis, no doubt you're going to be very familiar with this book as well. But keep in mind that this predates the book of Genesis by at least 1,000 years, and that's only from a recovered cuneiform tablet. Surely the archaeological record is very far from complete as far as how far back these tablets really go. The Atrahasis opens with the line, "When gods were in the ways of men," and it sets the stage perfectly for the first battle to come. Because the Anunnaki assemble and divide the posts of heaven and earth between the divine Anunnaki and the lesser Agigi. Of course, the Anunnaki get favorable positions, while the Agigi are left to do the labors of the gods. And so for 40 long years, day and night, the Agigi toil away, carving out both the Tigris and the Euphrates River. However, after a while, they decide they've had enough, and no longer will they do the work of the divine Anunnaki. So, one and all, the Agigi decide that they will rebel against Enlil, and they form a rabble outside of his house, waking his vizier Cusco, who in turn goes and wakes his lord, Enlil. He advises Enlil that a rabble has formed outside of his house, to which Enlil tells him to take up arms and go find out who started this rebellion. So Cusco goes outside, but much to the dismay of Enlil, he finds out that it's not just one Agigi who is rebelling against him, but all of the Agigi. Enlil is enraged. However, he summons the council of the Anunnaki to seek advice as far as what to do with the rebellion. Anu, the wise father of the Anunnaki, suggests that perhaps they had treated the Agigi unfairly, and just maybe their work was too hard and their toils too long. And it's at this point Enki suggests an alternative. Perhaps they should create a species to reduce the workload of the gods. And so, Enlil and Nintu, the wise womb mother of the Anunnaki, together create the first humans out of clay of the earth and the blood of a sacrificed Agigi. Nintu decrees that forevermore will the beat of the drum beat inside man's chest, the reminder of the god inside of him. And so, with the ability to procreate and immortality, very soon, man's numbers become too numerous and their noise far too loud, and this makes the gods restless and unhappy. So Enlil begins to send a series of scourges across mankind, some coming in the form of drought, others in plague, and others yet in famine. But every time this happens and humans get to a point of destruction, friend of mankind, Enki, always steps forward to present the main character of this story, the titular Atrahasis, with a plan to get out of Enlil's evil tricks. And so it is that every time Enlil sets about an evil curse on mankind, Enki goes to his faithful servant, the titular Atrahasis, and he gives him a plan how to save mankind from the brink of destruction. And every time the Anunnaki repeal their curses, mankind becomes again too numerous and his noise too loud. So Enlil finally grows tired of the endless circle, and he concocts a plan to end the noise once and for all. He decides he'll set about a great deluge on mankind, the likes of which has never been seen. A cataclysm so bad that it will completely wipe from the face of the earth the creation that him and Nintu had made. And reluctantly, all of the Anunnaki agree, as well as the Agigi, to an oath of silence that none of them should tell mankind of the coming deluge. This plan predictably doesn't sit quite right with Enki, so in the middle of the night, he sneaks out to Atrahasis' house. He keeps in mind his commitment to the Anunnaki, and being very careful not to break his oath, he decides instead of speaking to Atrahasis, he will instead address the reed wall located right on the other side of Atrahasis. And so it is that he says, "Listen here, reed wall. Listen here, reed wall, to what I am about to tell you, for a coming deluge will beset mankind, and if you want to survive, you must heed my warning." And so he cleverly sidesteps the agreement he made with the Anunnaki and is in the same turn able to preserve life. On the other side of the reed wall, Atrahasis listens to his master carefully, and in the morning begins to follow his instructions to the T. He deconstructs his house to start building the boat. He constructs a story to tell his people as to why he must leave their land. They all help, from the sick to the skilled, and with great haste are able to build Atrahasis' boat. He throws a banquet in the coming days of the storm, and with a very sick stomach, he paces constantly between the boat and his feasting people. As the storm bellows over the mountains with the might of bulls, Atrahasis takes one last look at his people and closes the hatch as the waves set upon him. For 7 days and 7 nights, Atrahasis and his family withstand the torrent of flood and rain. The boat is tossed endlessly on the waves. However, on the 7th day, light cracks through the boat. Atrahasis opens the hatch and discovers he's landed on what's modern-day Mount Ararat. He climbs to the top of the mountain and begins to prepare an offering to the gods. You see, something very funny had happened in that 7 days that Atrahasis and his family were going through hell. The gods up in heaven were themselves experiencing a special kind of hell. They had forgotten that in giving the labors to man, there was nobody left to till the fields, nobody to keep the cattle, and nobody to make them beer and wine. There was no humans offering to them. And so the gods had grown very hungry and very thirsty, and increasingly resentful of Enlil's decision to wipe out mankind. So when they smelt the offering at the top of the mountain, the Anunnaki swarmed like flies to it. But Enlil was enraged, realizing somebody had betrayed their oath. And so Anu, the wise king of the Anunnaki, steps forward to suggest who would break their oath, if not Enki, the friend of man. Enki defends his position, however, saying he didn't address Atrahasis, he talked to a reed hut wall. And either way, it was important because mankind had survived, and Enlil was a little hypocritical for coming to accept the offering of a man he had tried to wipe out. Enlil agrees that there is some logic in that. However, their original creation wasn't going to quite work. So from that point on, Atrahasis becomes the last immortal man, and from then on out, man's days would be numbered. Women would be cursed with infertility rates, and plagues would occasionally beseech the land, but never again would a world-ending cataclysm befall mankind. So that is the Atrahasis and its telling of our creation and the Great Flood. That story is 1,000 years older than the book of Genesis, just for reference. So it's very interesting to think about that story potentially being the progenitor of all the flood stories around the rest of the world. But now let's take a look at the Epic of Gilgamesh and what it has to say about the Anunnaki's continued exploits and their dealings with man. The Epic of Gilgamesh opens describing the great walled city of Uruk. It talks about the tyrant king Gilgamesh, of which the story gets its name, and how his people have grown tired of his antics. See, one of his favorite things to do is the night before a woman is to be married, as she waits in her bridal chamber for her husband, he comes in and beds her before the new groom gets the chance. So, amongst many other antics, his people have grown fairly tired of him, and they pray to the Anunnaki to humble him a little bit. Now, Gilgamesh is described as being 2/3 god and 1/3 man, and his mother is the Anunnaki Ninsun. So the presumption is somewhere in there a mortal man had a relationship with one of the Anunnaki female gods. The Anunnaki listen to the pleas of the people, and they decide that Gilgamesh should be taught a lesson. And so in the forest, Ninsurhurag creates a true force to be reckoned with, the yin to Gilgamesh's yang. And they create a true wild man, Enkidu, who grows up with all of the beasts of the forest, learning their ways and protecting them from the hunters. He frequently sabotages traps, and this irritates the hunters, who go back to Gilgamesh and complain of their troubles. They come up with a plan to send a harlot out to the woods, but Gilgamesh decides not any harlot will do. No, he sends the sacred harlot of Ishtar, Shamat. Gilgamesh instructs the two to go back to the forest and to wait there for Enkidu to appear. For if he can get Enkidu to embrace Shamat, then no longer will the beasts of the forest accept him as one of their own. And for 3 days, the hunter and the harlot wait by the watering hole, until finally Enkidu does appear. And when he does, Shamat reveals herself, and Enkidu, overcome with lust, can't help but embrace her. For 7 straight days, they engage in intercourse, and after which Enkidu has learned all of the secret arts of the woman. So, as predicted, the animals of the forest want nothing to do with him anymore, and it is with reluctance he heads into the city of Uruk, following behind the harlot Shamat. So Enkidu follows Shamat back to the great walled city of Uruk, wherein he combs his hair for the first time, anoints his body with oils, and feasts on bread and wine of men. He learns the true art of civility and has become a full man now. He hears the legends of the tyranny of Gilgamesh and that no man can stand against him. He's especially not fond of the way Gilgamesh will go and bed down a bride-to-be, so on the next time there is to be a wedding, Enkidu waits outside and, like clockwork, Gilgamesh appears to go bed down the wife-to-be. But Enkidu stops him, putting a literal foot in his path, to which Gilgamesh begins to grapple with him. The two fight back and forth for a while, until Gilgamesh wins by planting his foot and with a mighty heave, thrusting Enkidu over his knee and onto the ground. Now you might think there's some malice between the two, but exactly the opposite happens. They immediately become fast friends, and Enkidu pledges his life to protecting and being the friend of Gilgamesh. Emboldened by his new friend, Gilgamesh decides now is the perfect time to go and blaze his name into the stones where all the great men's names are written, and he concocts a perilous journey to travel to the cedar forest, wherein lives a great demon beast named Humbaba, whom belongs to Enlil. Much to the chagrin of Enkidu, who tries to warn Gilgamesh of the ferocity of Humbaba, the two of them set out and travel deep into the heart of the cedar forest, falling one of the largest cedar trees they can find. It immediately activates the beast into action, and the three of them engage in an epic and bloody battle, finally subduing the beast, getting it to beg for mercy, but deciding to take none on it, brutally eviscerating it and ending the battle. This, of course, irritates Enlil since that was his personal demon beast, but the rest of the Anunnaki convince Enlil not to take any action against the pair. The two head back to the great city of Uruk, wherein Ishtar proposes marriage to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, though, is no fool, and he knows the Anunnaki Ishtar has had many former lovers, and every one of those relationships ended poorly. Gilgamesh recounts in great detail all of those former lovers, and exactly all of their fates when they were done being Ishtar's plaything, and he respectfully declines, saying to her, "If I'm to be your next lover, will a similar fate not befall me?" Ishtar is furious, because as we've said here before, hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn, especially when that woman is an Anunnaki deity. The furious Ishtar ascends to the heavens, wherein she pleads with the Anunnaki to help make right on the arrogant Gilgamesh's slights, and they agree to send a great bull of the heavens down to earth to make Gilgamesh and Enkidu pay. But when this bull arrives, its breath is so fearsome, with its first breath, it breathes onto the ground and carves a chasm so deep and wide, 100 men fall to their death. Upon its second breath, 200 men fall to their death. Its third breath, 300 men. And it's at this point in time Enkidu and Gilgamesh spring into action. Grabbing the bull by the horns and the tail, Gilgamesh delivers the killing blow, and the gods are now furious, because they've killed not one, but two of the Anunnaki's pets. So the Anunnaki decide that somebody must pay for this, and who is to pay if not Gilgamesh? Well, Enkidu. And they deliver the guilty verdict to him, and quickly a illness sets onto Enkidu's body. It occurs to Enkidu that all of this really relates back to his encounter with the harlot Shamat. Had he have never met that harlot, he would still be a living man, free in the forests, roaming with his beast friends. But because of her, he was now laying there ill and dying. So he curses the harlot forevermore to live amongst the dregs of society, to have a life of constant and ongoing hell. Well, the Anunnaki hears him make this curse, and Shamash appears to him and begs Enkidu to repeal this curse, reminding him of all that the harlot Shamat had done for him, teaching Enkidu how to truly be a man. So he repeals his curse and provides a somewhat ironic blessing to the harlot. In his dying moments, him and his great friend Gilgamesh say goodbye to one another, and he wishes Gilgamesh farewell as he crosses from the land of the living into the land of the dead. Distraught by the loss of his friend and becoming ever increasingly aware of his own mortality, Gilgamesh begins to get a little frantic, and he decides he must do something drastic to obtain immortality. He decides he's going to descend to the underworld, where he crosses the river Styx and meets with the last living man of the Great Flood. That's right, he meets up with Atrahasis, who by the time of this story is referred to as Utnapishtim. There, Gilgamesh and Utnapishtim go over the details of the Great Flood, and Gilgamesh begs Utnapishtim for the chance to become immortal like he himself is. Utnapishtim considers this, and after a little hesitancy, agrees that if Gilgamesh can withstand hell for 7 days and 7 nights and stay awake non-stop, Utnapishtim will grant Gilgamesh eternal life. Well, Gilgamesh gives it his best shot, but ultimately fails and falls asleep. So he returns to Utnapishtim and begs for a second chance. Not granted a second chance at immortality, he's told about a plant at the bottom of the sea, which, if he can retrieve, will grant him many, many years off his life, thus extending his life and giving him near immortality. So Gilgamesh straps weights to himself and plunges to the bottom of the sea. He retrieves the plant and swims back to the surface, but as he lay there catching his breath, a serpent slithers by and snatches up his plant. Gilgamesh, having failed in his quest to obtain traditional immortality, has obtained immortality in another way and returns back to the land of the living. And here we are in 2024, still telling his story. To me, that is immortality. So ladies and gentlemen, what do you think? After having looked at the Enuma Elis, the Atrahasis, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, I'm left at a little bit of a crossroads personally. While it's very easy to dismiss these as nothing more than old stories and literary works meant to frighten early mankind into a life of morality, it's very hard to dismiss the extreme detail these stories go into describing the Anunnaki. They're said to not only be dealing with man in an omnipresent sort of way, but literally living in the towns and cities, receiving actual offerings in person, and personally interfering with the lives of man. So what were these things? Are they actually beings from another planet, Nibiru? Or are these just literary devices? I would love to know what your thoughts are, and hopefully whatever you think about it, you'll dive into the actual books themselves and see what these tablets said in their full versions. And granted, we don't have completely full versions, but you get what I mean. I'm going to link some of my favorite resources that I use and depend on down below, and I encourage you to check those out. Next week on East10 Tuesday, we're going to take a look at some expanded biblical and religious references to beings that appear very much to me like they exhibit the characteristics of the Anunnaki. But until then, I hope you have an incredibly blessed week to come. Stay good, friends, and I'll see you next week for another episode of East10 Investigates.